Senate Democrats are hard at work on the COVID relief bill. Will it bring actual relief to those suffering economic effects from the pandemic, or simply more pork barrel spending? New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith is here with analysis. Two Catholic archdioceses in the U.S. and the Bishops' Conference are warning against the use of a new COVID vaccine. Why? And what danger does it pose? Father Tad PACHOLCZYK of the National Catholic Bioethics Center is here to explain. Pope Francis heads to Iraq this weekend. What does he hope to achieve on this perilous apostolic visit? The National Catholic Register's Edward Pentin and Father BENEDICT KIELY will join us. Finally, Dr. Seuss is in the cultural crosshairs. Was it the green eggs? Wall Street Journal book critic MEGHAN COX GURDON is here to discuss this latest cancel culture casualty. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Big show for you tonight. Congressman Chris Smith, Father Tad PACHOLCZYK, Edward Pentin, Father BENEDICT KIELY, and MEGHAN COX GURDON are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. We've got a lot to cover. Let's begin. The U.S. Senate is expected to vote on a COVID relief bill in the coming days. The House passed the bill on Saturday with 219 votes. All House Republicans and 2 Democrats voted against the bill. The new round of spending currently contains no protections for the unborn and would allow abortion providers to obtain federal relief. Will there be a change in the bill before the final draft is sent to the White House? And what else is in this bill? Here to discuss is New Jersey Congressman, co-chair of the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus, Congressman Chris Smith. Congressman Smith, the House sent a $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill to the Senate, where a vote is expected on the weekend, as we said a moment ago. The new round of stimulus spending contains no Hyde Amendment protections and would permit abortion providers, including Planned Parenthood, to obtain government relief. Now, this is a radical departure from previous COVID bills as well as appropriations, going back how far? And why was no Hyde language included?
It was done by design by the House Democrats, and now the Senate Democrats are trying to affirm that. This would be the largest amount of money being spent to promote and perform abortion probably in history. The legislation is multifaceted, and there, as you pointed out so correctly, there is absolutely no Hyde protection. That is to say, no funding ban for abortion, and even the $350 billion that will go to states and local governments has absolutely no strings. It's unfettered money. They could do whatever they want, including providing huge amounts of cash to Planned Parenthood and other abortionists. Biden has proven that he is the abortion president. He's pushing this, as is his vice president. And, we're trying very hard. We're hoping that Senator Manchin will step up and say perhaps he won't even vote for it unless the Hyde protections are included. But as it stands now, this is a very, very sad day for the unborn girls, baby girls and baby boys.
In a Knights of Columbus Marist poll out in January, a majority of Americans, 58%, opposed using taxpayer money to fund abortions within the United States. That included 31% of Democrats, 83% of Republicans. Do you think there will be any senators who will look to add at least pro-life protections to that bill?
Well, there's procedural hurdles to do that, that Schumer and the same thing happened on the House side, because we have to proactively put the language in. And when you have the leadership controlling the rules of debate, and in this case, using a very, it's called reconciliation. It's a process that makes it harder to add language to it. All the other COVID, as you pointed out, COVID-19 relief packages, $4.1 billion, all had protections so that the abortion movement could not hijack this very important humanitarian aid. Now we have a situation where not only will money go to states, but federally qualified health centers will get another $7 billion. They're covered by Hyde right now. They're great health centers. I have 3 of them in my district. They now will be able to do abortions and paid for by the taxpayer. And as you pointed out, every poll shows, including the Marist polls, 58% of the people are against public funding for abortion. And there's also money in here for international abortions. There's no Helms language. There's no named after Senator Jesse Helms from years back. So it's just like it's a gift to those who dismember and chemically poison unborn children each and every day. And, how dare they hijack important humanitarian aid? And people can reasonably disagree as to how much we should be spending. There's still $1 trillion left over that is unspent and unobligated from pre-COVID-19 packages.
No, this is a boondoggle. I mean, this thing is a boondoggle. There's so little COVID relief here. Much of this is just payola and payoffs to special interest groups and groups that, frankly, had been cut out of federal subsidies for good reason. About $45 billion temporarily expands the Affordable Care Act subsidies for 2 years. $50 million goes to family planning coverage.
Exactly. Title 10 gets more money, which is the family planning package. And, Biden is already looking to end the Trump order that said you can't co-locate abortion performance clinics with family planning clinics. That's been through the courts. Of course, he's in the process of reversing that. But also there's money in here. If somebody loses their job and loses their health care, the Senate now is talking about 100% of that money will be paid for by the federal government. And again, there's no hide. There's no protection for the unborn child in terms of payments by the U.S. taxpayer. So there will be a huge increase. And those premiums, as you pointed out, that are paid for by the taxpayer under Obamacare will be greatly expanded. And they, too, have no pro-life protections in every category.
Congressman, I'm running out of time. I got to play this for you. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had this to say about the passing of the COVID bill by the House. Watch.
It seems the only group that doesn't support this bill are Senate Republicans and House Republicans. But the American people, including Republicans, show very strong support for this bill. And they know, and the reason is simple. We have to crush the virus. We have to get our economy back on track. We have to get Americans back to work.
Well, how does this get the economy back on track?
Well, it really doesn't. And frankly, if anything, the stock market is suggesting there are concerns about overheating in terms of too much stimulus aid. Now, I believe that we need to come to an agreement, bipartisan, bicameral, and with the White House on how much is really needed. Where are the hearings, congressional hearings with experts to try to discern how much goes into each area of concern, whether it's stimulus checks or PPP, even the Paycheck Protection Program, which has helped many small businesses survive by paying their employees their salaries to be a bridge from there's no economic activity to reopening their doors. We don't want people to go out of business. Why is Planned Parenthood going to get money? And all of that's embedded in this new bill, which is being hijacked by the abortion movement. And let me just say this, the White House is proving, and I hope everybody listening here will understand this, the Biden administration, and Biden used to himself vote for the Hyde Amendment. He has said we should not be forcing people to pay for abortions because we don't agree with that. He now is a wholly owned subsidiary of Planned Parenthood, he and his administration. They say jump, he says how high, and he writes a blank check. This legislation is a blank check to the abortion rights, or abortion people.
His administration also seems to be captivated or captured by the teachers' unions. There is $130 billion in this bill to go to public schools. Only $6 billion of that will get spent this year. The rest is fungible. What's the story here? And by the way, none of that money, none of it goes to private schools.
That's right. First, on the first part of it, most of the money will be spent after the year 2022, right up into the year 2028. We expect this pandemic to be continuing into 2028. And that's when much of the money, not just for schools, but other monies will be spent. Most of it is not spent right now to have maximum input because we already have $1 trillion sitting in the kitty that has been unspent and unobligated. And again, why aren't private and parochial schools, our Catholic schools, getting the assistance that they need? When the Democrats did the misnamed HEROES Act last year, which never became law, they had explicit language saying none of the funds can go to Catholic schools and other private schools. Do we think that somehow the pandemic and the virus just goes to certain schools and not others? All of our kids, right, public or private, are of infinite value to us, and we want to keep them as healthy as possible.
But Congressman, it's a crime at a time when so many public schools are closed. Parents are moving their kids to private and parochial schools, and they're overwhelmed with students because they're open. And now the government's offering them no assistance, no help. So the kids there can die of COVID. The ventilation system can be crummy. It doesn't matter because they're in a private school. This is a bias against private and parochial schools, and somebody should stand up for them.
Well, we are standing up. We're trying to make sure that there be. I mean, if Republicans have any say in this is, elections have consequences. People think, oh, they could vote for Biden and there's no consequence. Yeah, there is a consequence. There is a prejudice against little boys, little girls that are in our private and of course, in high school age as well. And they can't get the kind of aid that they desperately need under the COVID package. That is outrageous. Awful. We need to care for the public school and for the private schools.
Congressman Chris Smith, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us, and we'll keep watching as this COVID relief and all these bills proceed through Congress. Thank you.
Raymond, thank you so very much.
The release of a third coronavirus vaccine by Johnson & Johnson has been approved for distribution in the U.S., and it's rekindling the moral question. Should Catholics take a vaccine produced using abortion-derived cell lines? Now, 2 major U.S. archdioceses are cautioning against its use this week, as well as the United States Bishops' Conference. What is the Church teaching on this ethically complicated subject? Here to help us make sense of it all is Director of Education at the National Bioethics Center, Father Tad PACHOLCZYK. Father Tad, I'm glad you could join us. My archdiocese here in New Orleans and St. Louis put out statements this week asserting that the COVID-19 vaccine developed by Johnson & Johnson only is morally compromised, and they've asked Catholics to avoid it if they're given a choice. They cite concerns about the use of abortion-derived cell lines in the development and, worse, in the production of the vaccine. The Archdiocese of New Orleans wrote, "We maintain that the decision to receive the COVID-19 vaccine remains one of individual conscience in consultation with one's healthcare provider. We also maintain that in no way does the Church's position diminish the wrongdoing of those who decided to use cell lines from abortions to make vaccines. In doing so, we advise that if the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine is available, Catholics should choose to receive either of those vaccines rather than to receive the new Johnson & Johnson vaccine because of its extensive use of abortion-derived cell lines." Now, Father, in December, the Vatican said it is morally acceptable to receive COVID-19 vaccines that have used cell lines from aborted fetuses in the research and production process when ethically irreproachable vaccines aren't available. So should Catholics avoid the Johnson & Johnson vaccine?
Well, so Raymond, this has a little bit of nuance to it. Certainly, if all things are equal, so you have equal accessibility, you have equal efficacy between different vaccine candidates, and other details are largely the same, well then, yeah, you would want to look at using the one that is least associated with cell lines from abortions. But, the real world is kind of more complicated than that. And we find ourselves in a situation where, in fact, accessibility is a big deal. And you can't get all 3 of these vaccines, or even more than one in many locations. There's also issues here that are really important to consider that are just medical issues. I mean, just to give you an example, I met somebody recently who had an allergy to something called PEG, P-E-G, and it turns out that this is present in the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. So she cannot receive those vaccines. She will get very sick. She'll have an anaphylactic reaction if she is vaccinated with those. So in a case like that, she doesn't have multiple options. She has really only one option currently, which would be J&J. And then, there's one more piece here, Raymond, that I think is also going to sort of alter this landscape with time, and this is all of the discussion around variants, South African variant, variant from the United Kingdom, et cetera.
Right.
That means that vaccines are going to have to be tweaked and tuned, and it means that you are sometimes going to have choices where you're going to realize a better candidate will be the one that is associated with cell lines from abortions. So here, there's a need, as always, to make a judgment of prudence around this question. But as I said at the beginning, if everything is totally equal in all those variables, then yes, that is what would make sense and what the Church would counsel, that we choose the one with the least association with the cell lines from abortion.
Yeah, and that's basically what the Bishops' Conference is saying. They're saying, look, it's morally acceptable to get any of these COVID vaccines, but if you can choose the one with the least connection to abortion-derived cell lines, you should choose that. They're clearly stating that if a person can choose an alternative to the Johnson & Johnson, they should. But if not, then I guess you're going to have to take the Johnson & Johnson. But my question is, the way this is being depicted in the media, they're going through great pains to try to pit the U.S. bishops against the Vatican. But, Father, talk to me about subsidiarity. One would think the local bishops should be deferred to in these matters since it's originating in their dioceses, particularly something as changeable as a vaccine. And to be perfectly candid, and I've not seen this reported widely, there was no Johnson & Johnson vaccine when the Holy See guidance was sent out a few weeks ago, correct?
That's correct. And your point about subsidiarity is well taken. Each diocese is going to have a very different profile in terms of, for example, availability and accessibility. So the kind of guidance that comes out from a bishop will be important to the flock, and that really should be kind of the starting point. At the same time, there's this, as you know, delicate dance with larger entities that are also, it's also important that we engage in that. So with, the Bishops' Conference, with the Vatican, it's important that at the end of the day that we all be on the same page on this. And I think some of the distinctions that were made in the recent statement, December 2020, out of the Vatican, were very, very helpful in reminding people about where these lines of obligation fall, that to the extent that it is feasible, one should use alternatives, but it won't always be feasible. And that reality check is always coupled in the Vatican's language with an important emphasis on making sure that end users get out there and express their displeasure, their disapproval, their objection to the fact that these are the kinds of vaccine choices that are present in front of us. We really need to see manufacture of vaccines go in a brand new direction, step away intentionally from the use of these HEK293 and PER-C6 cell lines that came from these abortions in 72 and 85. I mean, why should this
Father,
continue? This is something, it's a scandal.
Let me just stop you there for 1 second and echo something that I've seen and that I'm hearing. I don't see any objection from anybody, from priests, from bishops, or from the laity, saying, we are upset that you are using these abortion lines in the vaccines. All I see is people dancing and doing TikTok videos of themselves getting shot in the arm. Looks like a celebration party to me.
Well, I'm sure there are some people that would fit that description perfectly, but Raymond, I'll tell you, at the National Catholic Bioethics Center where I work, we get routine questions. Do you have a template letter that I can use to write to the pharmaceutical company? I am upset about this. We need more choices. And we see this almost every day. So I think people are waking up to it. And I think, frankly, COVID-19 and the whole pandemic is a blessing in that sense. It is a silver lining that we have to take this moment as an opportunity to change the research culture that we find ourselves in and really steer this battleship in a brand new direction.
Father Ted, many pharmaceutical companies used, as you mentioned, the abortion-derived cell lines in their testing and even in the production. As a moral matter, I want to probe this idea. Where do you draw the line? I mean, if cells derived from, say, euthanized elderly people could save people in the next pandemic, might that be morally acceptable because of the common good? Might you have to take that vaccine?
Well, I mean, that's a very unpleasant scenario, just as unpleasant as the one that we are discussing. And why is it so unpleasant? Because there was no informed consent. Right? That's at the heart of this. You didn't ask that person who was euthanized, and actually, you know, if they were requesting their death, you couldn't get permission from them. But you know, putting that to the side, the fact that they were euthanized and that no informed consent was obtained, that's the fundamental violation, just like for the case of the child. Because if you have a natural miscarriage, mom and dad can donate the tissues from their deceased child, and it's like an organ donation. Doesn't raise any fundamental moral problems. So, you know, these scenarios that you're raising remind us that we're in a situation, we've sort of backed ourselves into a corner using morally problematic sources, and it really is essential that we step out of that corner and start moving in a new way. And I think, you know, part of the challenge here is to raise the volume sufficiently so that researchers and so that pharmaceutical companies are made well aware of this concern.
I know, but sadly, the only moral argument being advanced right now, and it's bigfooting all the concerns you just raised, is if you're a good person, if you're a moral person, you will take this vaccine for the good of others, and that washes any hint of immorality or connection to abortion or others' deaths or anything, frankly. That trumps it all. Isn't that the moment we find ourselves in?
I think it is the moment, you're right, and there's a certain tendency to simplify things down to the lowest common emotional denominator. And if the emotions, you know, make me feel good, oh, I'm contributing to herd immunity, and, you know, there's a certain amount of that will be legitimate and that we need to allow, but at the same time, that cannot be the totality of our thinking about this. It has other levels and subtleties, as we're discussing here and as the Vatican documents remind us. So it's really valuable, I think, for people to get acquainted with these types of distinctions and with what the Vatican has taught on this, and to, you know, mark out a direction forward so that they themselves don't just remain passive participants, as it were, but that they're actively engaged in this very important historical moment that we find ourselves in with the generation of new vaccines. And, you know, the likelihood of a repeat, frankly, Raymond, I think there will be other, you know, viruses in the future that we're going to have to contend with through this vaccine technology. So let's start, you know, beating the drum and getting the word out so that people don't passively engage in these problematic directions.
Yeah, no, I think there has to be also an expansion, I think, in the moral teaching of the Church to consider the complexities and the moral failings of some of these paths that I think we're already down. But I thank you for the clarity, Father Tad. And just to sum up, because I don't want any confusion from people, the Church is teaching that if the vaccine is available, you should take it.
Well, the Church is teaching if the vaccine is available, you should discern whether your circumstances warrant the taking of it. That's the key point. So you have to make a judgment about benefits and burdens and about risk assessment. And so it's not a simple, oh, everybody should take it. No. But if you're in a high-risk category, then you need to look very closely at this. And if you're not in a high-risk category, you will have a little more latitude, as it were, in terms of questions like, should I wait for another iteration of one of these vaccines? etc. So it's not a universal call by the church by any means, but the church does frame this in terms of, look, vaccines have been a great blessing to public health, and we should acknowledge that and engage in their use in a morally appropriate way.
Yeah. Well, I think the New Orleans and the Bishops' Conference interventions are actually helpful because they invite introspection, moral introspection, as you move toward taking this vaccine or not, and that's a good thing.
No, I agree with you totally. I think this is another fortunate moment for us to kind of get into the particulars, and the statements by those dioceses have certainly assisted with heightening the dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Father Tad Pacholczyk's commentary and his ethical profiles on the COVID vaccines on the National Catholic Bioethics Center website. They're at ncbcenter.org as well as fathertad.com. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Raymond.
My next guests have been reporting and speaking out on the plight of Christians in Iraq and the Middle East for years. They're here to discuss Pope Francis's apostolic journey to Iraq this weekend, what's on the Pope's agenda, and what are the risks, as well as some breaking news from Rome. Here with analysis is Rome correspondent of the National Catholic Register, Edward Pentin, and founder of Nazarene.org, Father BENEDICT KIELY. Thank you both for being here. Pope Francis heads to Iraq for a potentially dangerous apostolic visit this weekend. He'll be there from March 5th through the 8th. Here's what he had to say this week in advance of his arrival. My dear Christian brothers and sisters from Iraq who have testified to your faith in Jesus amid harsh sufferings, I cannot wait to see you. I'm honored to encounter a church of martyrs. Thank you for your witness. Ed, your thoughts on the significance of this visit, and what does the Pope and the Vatican, what do they hope to achieve here?
Well, the main aim to what they want to achieve are two main reasons, really, why the Pope is going. First of all, is to encourage the persecuted there, those who've suffered for many years, even before ISIS arrived in 2014. They've suffered a lot for centuries, but especially in the recent history since the Iraq War, especially. So he's going there to give them encouragement, but also another key part of this visit is to reach out to the other faiths. It's going to be very much an interreligious dialogue emphasis to this visit. He's going to be at the birthplace of Abraham in Ur, which is the first time a pope has ever been there. It's the first time he's ever been to Iraq as well. So it's a very significant trip and a very historic one.
Father Keeley, the Pope will visit a Christian population that's been devastated by life under the Islamic State. What is the condition now of that Christian community? And what are they looking to hear from the Pope? And do you think they'll hear it?
They're looking, Raymond, to hear one thing above all other things, and that is that the Pope cares about them, that he wants to put the world's focus on their persecution. All the other things, including the interreligious dialogue angle, are very much secondary. They want the world's attention to be focused on Francis and then focusing on them, all that they've suffered, not just, as Edward said, because of ISIS, but as you know well, from the invasion of Iraq, which St. John Paul II warned would decimate the Christian community. Now the Christian community is really in danger of extinction.
No, it's tragic what has happened there and how they've been brutalized, not only by the Iraq War, but then by ISIS moving in, and the cities are in ruin. But you mentioned something there I want to pick up on. You said the Christians in the region want their plight to be front and center, but it seems the Vatican is emphasizing this outreach to Islam, this dialogue with Muslims. Is there a chance that something might get lost in translation here during this visit?
There's a major chance, and that's what they're most concerned about, that if that is the central focus, I've been told, I'm in regular contact, almost weekly contact with people in Iraq, priests, etc. They say that if that's the main focus, almost it's better that he doesn't come. They're praying. I think the words you read out at the beginning are very good. If that's the focus, things will go well. But there's a nervousness because that seems to be one of the features of Francis's pontificate, which is this interreligious dialogue. And basically Christians in Iraq say to me, We don't need to dialogue. We were the peaceful people. We don't need to be told to be brothers. We were brothers and sisters. We were living in peace. It was our people who were attacked, our women raped, our children kidnapped. So they don't need any lessons about living in peace.
Security is obviously a major concern here, Ed. A round of rocket attacks hit a U.S. and coalition military installation on Wednesday. One U.S. contractor died. The White House has warned of possible retaliation. What are you hearing about the security on the ground in Iraq? I know there were some in the Vatican, I spoke to them, who were hoping the Pope would cancel this visit.
Yes, well, that is a concern, but the Pope has been on these sort of trips before. I mean, I went with him to Egypt, and that I remember that was a very considered a very dangerous trip at the time because of the Islamist threat. He was also went, of course, to the Central African Republic, where there was a civil war going on at the height of the civil war. So he's no stranger to visiting dangerous places, and I think he really quite relishes the challenge. I think he sees this very much as a sort of a mission that he must undertake. But there is high security that he's going to have to face, and that includes he won't be driving around in an open top car at all. It'll be all closed. He'll have one, I think, open top appearance, which will be the Mass, I think, in Erbil. Right. But apart from that, it'll be very much very, very, very tight security, I think.
The other obvious concern at the moment, and you read a lot of this in the Western press, is this pandemic. Iraq's currently seeing an uptick in COVID infections, but Iraq officials say they're taking every precaution. And here's a statement. They said in preparation for the Pope's visit, the Civil Defense Directorate are sterilizing the churches within the geographic area of the Qareda neighborhood to reduce the spread of coronavirus. This campaign has been going on for a week, and today is the last day of sterilizing the churches. Father Ben, after all this Christian community has endured, how big a deal is COVID for Iraqi Christians?
It's a big deal, Raymond. COVID is very bad, but as you said, what they've been through, this is pretty low on the list now. When they've been driven out of their cities, when they've been bombed, when they've been murdered and kidnapped. So they got on with life. 10,000 people in a soccer stadium, there's going to be no social distancing. In Iraq, that's not really something they even understand anyway. So I think if he didn't come now, the question is, when would he come? It's dangerous, perhaps. It's maybe not the right time, but this is the only time.
Well, Ed, the Pope has had the vaccine, right? So what's the concern?
Yes, well, I mean, the concern, I suppose, is not so much with him and the people traveling with him, because they've all had the vaccine and they've all been tested. But the concern is really, as Father Benedict was saying, it's really the Iraqis, of course, and they're the ones who are going to be pushed together in crowds and so forth. So that's I think, the concern, really.
Both of you visited Iraq together in 2018, just after the collapse of the Islamic State. We're going to roll some video of that visit. Ed and then Father, how has present-day Iraq changed from what you experienced then, if at all?
Well, I haven't been there, of course, since then, but I think there has been quite a bit of reconstruction since then, and quite a few Christians have come back to Iraq since that time. And I think also in Mosul, where we both went in 2018, there's been a lot of reconstruction there. It was devastated when we went there, and there was lots of bombed out buildings and really a completely devastated city after 4 years of occupation by ISIS. And that was and that's going to take a long time to rebuild. But I think that they have started on that, and I think I've heard from Archbishop Majib, who I spoke to this week. He's the Archbishop of Mosul. He said that 60 to 70 families have returned to Mosul now. So there is hope that there can be sort of reconstruction and bring the Christians back there. And he said that the people there, the Christians there, are very much hoping that, or very, very grateful that the Pope's coming, because they say that gives them strength and encouragement to come back and to make a life there. So that could be a very positive fruit of this visit.
Father, 60 to 70 families doesn't sound like, a huge crowd.
No, it's a drop. Before 2014, in fact, by about 2008, there were about 14,000 Christians in Mosul, and they were driven out long before ISIS. But Edward is right. There's construction, et cetera, but there's only one open church in Mosul itself. one resident priest. None of the bishops are actually living in Mosul. It's too dangerous. The whole area of the Nineveh Plain where the Christians are is now called disputed territories between Iraq and Kurdistan, and it's full of Shia militia who are pushing the Christians out, not by violence, but by economic and demographic change, refusing to let Muslims buy from Christian shops. So, yes, people are not being slaughtered, but it's a slow, what I use the image of strangulation. They're slowly being squeezed. And the saddest thing of all is the young people are all asking to leave because they don't feel like they have any hope. There's no jobs and security. So maybe the Pope can give them a little bit of hope. No, that's what they say. They all want to emigrate.
The Pope is going to try to, as you mentioned earlier, bolster this fragile, dwindling community. He'll also attempt to build a bridge to the Islamic world. There's a historic meeting with the Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani. Ed, what is the political significance of this meeting? And do you see the Pope having any true dialogue with the Muslim community?
Well, I think he's certainly, that's a major part of it. He really wants to help, really wants to meet Ali Sistani, because this is considered to be a very significant, he's a very influential Shia leader in Iraq and in the region itself. So this is going to be a very significant meeting. But of course, this is only a small part of it, and that he wants to also reach out to the other religions too, the Yazidis, of course, and even some of the others. Faiths, other believers and non-believers as well. So the Zoroastrians, for example, as well. But so this is going to be a very significant part, and also he's going to be bringing his human fraternity document, and he's going to give that, of course, as a gift to Ali al-Sistani and to others too. And he's going to really want to share that the contents of that with all of these people.
Father, some have criticized the perceived emphasis on ecumenism, interreligious dialogue here over the plight of the Christian community. There's also been, I've seen a lot of ink spilled about this planned interreligious prayer service on Saturday in Ur between the Pope and the Yazidi sect. Why this controversy? I mean, popes have had interfaith prayer services before. Is there any merit to this criticism?
That's hard to say, Raymond. I think sometimes some of that's on the outer fringes, as we might say, of people who are really looking for trouble. I mean, the important thing is that, yes, as you say, previous popes, John Paul and Benedict, have done this. The real problem, though, about dialogue is you have to have two people who can hear with dialogue. And part of the problem is the church has certainly under this pontificate has tended to speak a great deal about dialogue especially with Islam. And we wonder, and I know in Iraq and across the Middle East, they often feel that dialogue is only possible when the other person is willing to also change and be open to that dialogue. And often it's a dialogue of the deaf.
Terrible, but a reality. You're right. Ed, before we go, I want to get your reaction to some breaking news from the Vatican. Pope Francis has nominated Cardinal Joseph Tobin of Newark to be a member of the very important Congregation for Bishops. Now, this would give Tobin an influential role in the selection of bishops all over the world. What does the appointment tell you about Francis's vision for the church, the kind of men he's looking for bishops? And there's also a rumor that Cardinal Cupich of Chicago, who's already on that congregation, may soon be appointed head of it.
Yes, well, this isn't really unexpected. A lot of people would think it's kind of predicted that this would happen, that Cardinal Tobin would be chosen. It's very much in keeping, his vision is very in keeping with that of Pope Francis. And of course, Cardinal Cupich is already a member of the Congregation for Bishops. Right. And that vision is really, as Francis said recently to a group of journalists from Catholic News Service, that, I think he wants, or at least he insinuated that he wants more sort of a moderate, as he puts it, a moderate group of bishops in the United States Bishops' Conference, and and this is part of the way of doing it. And I think that's why he's appointed him as a member of this congregation. It's quite a significant appointment in the sense that now Cardinal Tobin has quite a lot of influence now over who becomes bishop in the United States, but also beyond. And so it's quite a significant step. But as I say, it is rather expected. But of course, the other thing that is also worth remembering is that Archbishop Vigano mentioned him in his famous statement in 2018, and this is quite significant in the fact that Cardinal Tobin, Cardinal Cupich were both selected without going through the nunciature. They were both chosen sort of hand-picked by Pope Francis, and so again you can see this again happening here with the Congregation for Bishops, that these two have been very much hand-picked by Francis to be part of this, and very much to push through his vision for the Church.
I also wanted to very quickly get your take on this recent interview with Benedict XVI in an Italian newspaper this week, in which he defends his decision to step down from the papacy, even calling some critics of his decision fanatical. What are you hearing about this? I've read some opinion pieces that they're not quite certain whether this is an authentic interview or not.
Yeah, there's questions like that too here, Raymond. And I think people say, well, it doesn't sound like Benedict. The quotes were sort of taken very much sort of out, and we never could see the full transcript, or there's no video. And so there's a lot of suspicion and doubts as to whether this is true. I have written to Massimo Franco, who was the journalist who did the interview, and I've asked Archbishop Georg Genswein, the personal secretary of Benedict, if these really just how this interview came about and whether these comments are accurately reported. I haven't heard from either of them, but I think there are doubts about it. But I think on the other hand, though, that it is rather consistent with what Benedict has said in the past about his resignation. Some viewers may remember he had rather a frosty exchange with Cardinal Walter Brandmüller about the resignation, and he's quite sensitive to criticism to the resignation, and this sort of comes through in this interview as well. So you could argue that there is consistency there.
Well, we will leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you both. The Next Pope, The Leading Cardinal Candidates by Edward Pentin is available at bookstores everywhere. You can naturally follow Ed's reporting at the National Catholic Register. And Father Benedict Kiely's ministry to the persecuted Christians in Iraq and Syria is at Nazarene.org. Thank you both.
Thank you, Raymond.
And look what I got in the mail this week. To celebrate the release of my new picture book, The Thief Who Stole Heaven, which hits bookstores March 9th, EWTN and I are hosting a special online book signing that I hope you'll join. Now, this is the origin story of the good thief, Dismas, that you probably have never heard. I certainly didn't. It's based on the writings of saints like Augustine, Peter Damian, and others. It's a redemptive tale of adventure for the whole family. It makes a wonderful Easter gift. A reviewer this week said it's Aladdin meets The Chosen, which was an old biblical miniseries. And now you can get an autographed edition of The Thief Who Stole Heaven from the EWTN catalog. I've posted the link on my Facebook page. You can go to RaymondArroyo.com. You'll also be able to join the live book signing on March 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern on EWTN's Facebook Live page, as well as their YouTube channels. If you order from EWTN, they'll send you a signed edition of the book, and I'll take all your questions along with Doug Keck. We're going to be talking for an hour. The Thief Who Stole Heaven arrives next week. Go to EWTN's catalog at EWTNRC.com for all the details and to pre-order your copy. You can visit discoverlegends.com for more information. March is National Reading Month, and just this past Tuesday was the National Education Association's annual Read Across America Day. Now, the NEA established this day in 1998 as an effort to promote children's literacy. March 2nd also happens to be the birthday of Theodore Geisel, better known as the iconic Dr. Seuss. Well, earlier this week, Dr. Seuss Enterprises announced that 6 of his books, 6, would no longer be published because of supposedly racist and insensitive imagery within them. Why is this happening now? And what seems to be driving this effort as we see other literary works and authors removed from shelves and school curriculums. Here to discuss this and more is the children's book critic at the Wall Street Journal and author of the incredible book Enchanted Hour, The Enchanted Hour, MEGHAN COX GURDON. MEGHAN, thanks for being here. I want to start with the 6 Dr. Seuss books in question. They're no longer going to be punished. They include And to Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street, If I Ran the Zoo, Scrambled Eggs, Super, and others. We have some graphics I'm going to put up, but the claim is that the illustrations inside depict racist or insensitive imagery. Now, these books were created between 1930s and the 1970s. One of the books being pulled was Dr. Seuss's very first book, And to Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street. The book was selected to be pulled because of outdated portrayals of Asian people. It includes a character described as Chinese, having slanted eyes and eating bowls of rice. Seuss actually altered the book, MEGHAN, in 1978. And at that time he said, I had a gentleman with a pigtail, I colored him yellow and called him a Chinaman. That's the way things were 50 years ago. In later editions, I refer to him as a Chinese man, and I've taken the color out of the gentleman and removed the pigtails, and now he looks like an Irishman. MEGHAN, that book was first published in 1937. Your thoughts on discontinuing the very first Dr. Seuss children's book?
I think the really remarkable irony here is that the institution or the company that was formed, to perpetuate the legacy of Dr. Seuss is now openly erasing it. We are in an extremely strange time, as you know and as your viewers know. There is immense sensitivity. It is the discontinuation of these books seems to me a great. It's disgraceful, frankly. If there is, if there is vestigial interest in them, if people are offended by them, first of all, if people are offended by them, they needn't read them. Secondly, if there is, as there should be, of course, scholarly interest in them, as you point out, And to Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street was Seuss's first book, or was the book that sort of established his foothold in the children's industry. These, why extirpate them? Why expunge them? There are offensive depictions of all kinds of people and all kinds of things all around us. Just look at Twitter. There's all kinds of things.
Right.
We cannot proceed in a culture, certainly a literary culture, in which hurt feelings is a justification for defenestrating literature.
Another book that depicts. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. So I want to talk about something very important, I think, because this doesn't get addressed enough, and it's something we really need to unpack when we think about children's books and what is taking place in the world of children's books, and that is that there is now sort of an axiom in the industry and in the educational world that children need to see themselves in literature, and this is understood in a very specific and rather limiting way. Now, people should be able to see themselves in literature. Well, you might say that's the point of literature. We read literature. We may not see ourselves as myself as a middle-aged woman in the Iliad, let's say, but I can see my own pride in the pride of Achilles. I can see my own shame in the shame of Agamemnon. Whatever we can experience. That the multifarious human life by reading books. But what's being understood now is that if books do not present children according to very specific identity politics categories, then these books are somehow transgressing the bounds of proper literature. And then that idea. That right, and then that idea can be twisted, right? So that if there is a depiction of a character that is unflattering, or as they say now, of course, problematic or offensive, then that is then an excuse to extirpate the book, because children must not encounter negative images. It's of course it's a kind of tactical campaign to do this, but it's all, some of it, like the road to hell is paved with what? Good intentions. There are some good intentions here as we seek to expand the body of books that are given to children, and the kind of, expand the range of authors and of cultures and whatnot, all of which is, largely to the good. Who doesn't want more books?
Right.
But in that process, we're also now we're now kind of chipping away at what used to be a kind of humanistic understanding of the purpose of literature.
Yeah. There was another book that depicts allegedly offensive images of people in the book, If I Ran the Zoo, believe it or not. Here's an illustration of a Russian dressed in Soviet-style military gear and a Middle Easterner atop a camel. Now, obviously, Meghan, this is an artist, in this case Theodore Geisel's mid-century vision of people and cultures, but frankly, so is It's a Small World in Disneyland. I mean, that has to be the high temple of stereotypical depictions of races and cultures and countries in little dolls. I guess you got to burn that place down too.
But you're that's interesting. You talk about the Soviet or whatnot. What? Okay, so something might be stereotypical. Stereotypes do not spring from nowhere. They're not necessarily harmful. They might. It's a way of it's sort of visual shorthand. You want to evoke something, so you choose. I mean, I don't want to go down on record as the woman who defends unpleasant stereotypes. But a stereotype is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's just a very quick way of communicating something. He's working with images that are going to be looked at very briefly, just a couple of lines of text. And as you say, without this sort of, with the mid-century mindset, he wasn't thinking how this, obviously not all people in the Middle East have camels. Okay, right? It seems
but
like
not all Americans wear headdresses and cowboy hats either. But that's how you see them depicted in in certain bits of literature and in comic books. I mean, it was the American ideal in some ways. But obviously, that doesn't necessarily equate to where we are today. But should it be banned is the question. Should it be stricken from public consumption?
Well, so I'm sure that the Seuss Enterprises people would tell you nothing is being banned. We are merely discontinuing. There's a lot of linguistic gymnastics going on these days about what is actually happening. I think actually the more apposite word is banished. What is happening is that classic books are being banished from classrooms, that the Seuss books are being banished from the general world. And I think, by the way, this, in some ways, my suspicion is with the removal of these 6 titles from circulation, as it were, that this is an attempt by the Seuss enterprise to protect the brand. I am not hopeful that they will be successful in this, because Dr. Seuss's crimes, I actually have a piece coming out about this in the weekend Wall Street Journal. His crimes are not just these, handful of images that are not completely, au fait with our times now. His crimes predate his life in children's books. And as we know, have this literary culture where nothing can be forgiven and nothing can be forgotten. And every offense is still fresh, no matter how often someone apologizes. As, by the way, Seuss did, as you pointed out in what you were saying earlier on, and maybe in your introduction, that he himself, he disavowed and was sorry for some of the cruder depictions that he had in his earlier career. And in fact, you look at the large body of his work was about, in some ways, making up for that. He fought against racism and bigotry and anti-Semitism, or he inveighed against these constantly, using allegory and funny characters and whatnot. But that was the point of what he was doing, which is one reason why he continues to be such a beloved figure. I mean, even before all this happened, I reviewed a biography of him a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, and I noticed it was really interesting that he's been dead for 20 years, and I think it was something like I think it was March of 2019. His titles, 15 of his titles, were in the top 25 best-selling children's books in the country. So there's a massive residual feeling of positive association for Dr. Seuss in the country.
I want to show you how 2 literacy advocates are reacting to the removal of these Dr. Seuss books. This is Pamela Good. She's the CEO of Beyond Basics. Listen.
It's just evidence of how far we've come, that we look back at those images and we say, you know what, it just doesn't fit who we are and want to be.
And this is Linda Foster Radke. She is president of Story Monsters, LLC, with a very different take.
If they would update the book, if they maybe have an updated curriculum guide that goes along with it and use it once again as a teaching tool, what better opportunity? We cannot shelter our kids from what was, but again, we can influence them on what will be.
Your thoughts on those approaches? Which is the right approach? Wouldn't it be better to put Dr. Seuss and his books in historical context?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I argue for this in my book, The Enchanted Hour. The solution for problematic or too problematic texts, let's say, is not to remove them, to put them down the memory hole that Orwell had. The solution is to add more text, more images, more discussion. Things get, children are resilient. They can handle knowing that things were different in the past. Nobody's putting out these, let's say, I don't want to use the word harmful, but no one's trying to sell these images, today. We can understand that the past was different. It was another country. When, children are old enough to know that. I mean, even little children can grasp that.
Right. Right. But I have to say, just to think I saw it on Mulberry Street, I remember seeing that as a child. Frankly, I don't remember the little Chinese character at all. I mean, I remember that when I saw it again, I said, oh, there he is. But as a child, even as an adult, that didn't somehow move me to hateful or racist ideas. I thought, oh, look, the whole neighborhood's here. The cops and the circus and the guy with the restaurant, it's the whole neighborhood showing up. So I think we may be also reading in much more than a child does. Perhaps we're bringing our own biases, or the critics are, to these works.
I think that you're spot on there. And the truth of the matter is, if you look at Seuss's illustrations, he's got that wonderful sort of kinetic line and kind of crazy animals and bizarre scenes. The human caricatures, or in the case of one of the other books, the little Eskimo fish. That's something that can't be seen anymore.
Right.
These are ludicrous figures. All the figures are ludicrous figures. All of their attributes are exaggerated. If a character has hair, it doesn't just have hair. It has, exploding hair. That's what caricature is. And you're right. I think children are absolutely able to see these things and not mind about them. But unfortunately, we are inculcating these rising generations with a degree of sensitivity to personal offense that is not conducive to a happy and pluralistic society, I'm afraid. And I think we're going to see more. I really doubt that discontinuing these 6 titles is going to buy the Seuss Enterprises the peace that it would like to have. I will even, let's even concede that they really are trying to do something genuinely good here. It will not discourage any woke warrior from going after them more. Because as I said, Seuss's crimes are not just in his books, they're in everything else that he did in his career. And we don't now live at a time when people are willing to overlook that.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time at that museum, the Seuss Museum in Springfield in the Berkshires. And when people get a gander at some of what he wrote, and created before the children's books, the criticism is going to come down hot and heavy. And by the way, Universal Studios, which has Zeus Landing at their theme parks, they are reviewing a number of the attractions there because they're based on 2 of these now banned or banished books, If I Ran a Zoo and the Mulberry Street book. So I see a chipping away here and a diminishment of him in the cultural landscape. Universities, by the way, Megan, before I let you go, across the country, they're not requiring English majors to study Shakespeare. According to a study by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, only 4 of 52 universities and liberal arts colleges ranked highest by the U.S. News and World Report required their English majors to take a class exploring Shakespeare's works. They're claiming that there are racist depictions there and it represents white supremacy and colonialism. Your thoughts?
I despair when I hear things like that. It's quite extraordinary. It's like teaching math without teaching algebra, I mean, Shakespeare is absolutely foundational to the English language. If you're teaching world literature, even then you can't escape Shakespeare. Shakespeare is taught and all over the world in many languages. Shakespeare is furthermore, emulated and borrowed from all over the world. Universities that cut English majors off from the greatest practitioner of the English language in human history are neglecting their responsibility. They are betraying their students. Yeah,
as somebody who studied Shakespeare, acted in his dramas and comedies and had his words in my mouth nightly. I agree with, I couldn't agree more. It reshapes your, not only your thinking, but your appreciation of humanity and the power of language in it. And to deprive our children of that and future generations, it's criminal. Meghan, I wish I had an hour. We will leave it there and we'll have you back. The Enchanted Hour, The Miraculous Power of Reading Aloud in the Age of Distraction by MEGHAN COX GURDON is available at bookstores everywhere. You should read it, and you can catch her book reviews at the Wall Street Journal. Thank you, Meghan.
Thank you, Raymond. Bye.
The World Over is now available as a podcast. Download us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Take us wherever you go. That's all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.